Blood stained the pristine marble of the High Palace. Queen Victoria expected to find her children dead, victims of a ruthless orbital coup. Instead, she found the galaxy's most terrifying apex assassins torn to pieces. Standing over them was her mild-mannered human gardener, clutching a dripping fire axe. The royal shuttle cut through the stratosphere of Prime Meridian, the capital world of the Coalition. Inside the velvet-lined cabin, Queen Victoria stared at the holographic datapads arrayed before her, though her mind was miles away. She was a ruler of the Orion Arm, a monarch to billions of fragile, elegant beings whose civilization was built on diplomacy, crystal lattice architecture, and energy shielding. Yet, despite all her power, she felt a profound unease, leaving her children behind. Prince Arthur, merely 7 standard years old, and Princess Beatrice, 4, had been left in the supposedly impenetrable safety of the High Palace, guarded by the elite Praetorians. "Your Majesty, we are approaching the diplomatic summit at Geneva Station," Commander Harrison said, his tall, slender frame bowing slightly. Like all of their species, Harrison was nearly 7 feet tall, with bones as light and hollow as a bird's, relying on kinetic energy shields rather than physical armor. "The planetary defense grid is fully operational. The children are perfectly safe." Victoria nodded, massaging her temples. "I know, Harrison. It is just the mother's intuition. The Syndicate has been making aggressive moves in the outer sectors. I do not trust them." Miles below, on the surface of Prime Meridian, the High Palace was bathed in the golden light of the system's twin suns. In the royal nursery's adjoining maintenance corridor, Thomas Fletcher wiped grease from his forehead with a rag. Thomas was a human. In the wider galactic community, humans were considered a curious anomaly. Coming from Earth, a high-gravity, high-radiation death-world, humans were short, incredibly dense, and possessed a bizarrely robust musculoskeletal system. However, they were generally viewed as laborers, mechanics, and engineers rather than warriors. They lacked the elegant biotics of the Coalition races. Thomas worked as a Level 3 HVAC technician for Caterpillar Interstellar, a division of the ancient Earth Machinery Corporation that had cornered the market on heavy planetary infrastructure. Before taking this quiet, pension-backed job, Thomas had served in the 75th Ranger Regiment back on Earth, and later spent 5 years doing high-risk private security for Constellus in the asteroid mining belts. But he had left that life behind. He was 42, tired of being shot at, and perfectly content fixing climate control scrubbers in a peaceful palace. He tightened a bolt on the thermal exchanger using a heavy steel wrench. Through the glass partition, he could see Arthur and Beatrice playing with anti-gravity blocks. The royal nursemaid, a delicate woman named Genevieve, watched over them. Thomas smiled faintly. He had a daughter back on Earth. Working near the royal children made the crushing vastness of space feel a little less lonely. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Thomas paused, his wrench hovering over the bolt. The low, ubiquitous hum of the palace's kinetic shield generators sputtered, then died completely. "That's not a power surge," Thomas muttered, his military instincts, dormant for years, instantly flaring to life. Before he could reach the comms panel, the northern wall of the palace, 3 feet of reinforced crystalline glass, shattered inward with deafening violence. The shockwave threw Thomas against the steel bulkheads of the maintenance shaft. Dust and debris filled the air. The concussion was enough to instantly kill Genevieve, whose fragile biology couldn't handle the sudden atmospheric overpressure. She collapsed, blood leaking from her ears. Arthur and Beatrice screamed, huddled together under a play table. Through the smoke, shadows moved. They were clad in matte black tactical armor, carrying heavy plasma repeaters. It was the Syndicate. Led by the infamous mercenary captain Gideon, the strike team had bypassed the orbital sensors, using stealth drop pods. Their goal was simple: assassinate the royal bloodline to plunge the Coalition into a war of succession. Thomas peered through the maintenance grate. He saw 4 Syndicate commandos step into the nursery. They moved with predatory grace. One of them kicked the play table aside, leveling a rifle at the weeping Prince Arthur. Targets acquired. The commando hissed into his radio, executing. Thomas didn't think. He didn't weigh the political ramifications or calculate the odds. The deep, ancient, terrifying biology of a human being witnessing children in danger overrode his rational mind. Earth evolution had forged humans to be endurance predators, but it had also hardwired them with a hysterical, violent protective instinct. The adrenal glands above his kidneys squeezed, flooding his bloodstream with epinephrine. His heart rate spiked. Time seemed to slow down. With a roar that sounded more beast than man, Thomas kicked the maintenance grate off its hinges. The heavy steel grating, weighing nearly 80 pounds, flew through the air and struck the lead commando in the chest. The alien's kinetic shield flared, but the sheer physical mass of the grate overloaded it. The commando was thrown backward, his hollow ribs snapping like dry twigs under the impact. The other 3 commandos spun around, their weapons tracking the sudden intrusion. They expected a towering elite Praetorian. Instead, they saw a 5'10" human wearing greasy Carhartt overalls, his eyes dilated into black pools of sheer, unadulterated fury. "Run!" Thomas bellowed at the children, his voice booming like a physical force. He didn't retreat. He charged. A plasma bolt seared past Thomas's ear, the heat blistering the side of his face. He didn't even flinch. On Earth, humans survived bear attacks, car crashes, and falling debris. In a galaxy where combat was decided by energy output and lightspeed shielding, raw, kinetic brutality was an archaic nightmare. Thomas closed the distance in a fraction of a second. The second commando tried to bring his rifle to bear, but Thomas swung his heavy steel wrench. The tool, forged from dense earth steel, bypassed the energy shield, which was designed to stop high-velocity energy, not slow, massive kinetic strikes. The wrench caved in the side of the commando's helmet. The alien crumpled instantly. The third commando fired, clipping Thomas in the left shoulder. Plasma burned at 10,000 degrees, instantly cauterizing the flesh. It was a wound that would have put a coalition soldier into fatal shock. Thomas merely grunted. The pain only dumped more adrenaline into his system, turning his blood into liquid fire. He dropped the wrench, grabbed the barrel of the commando's rifle, and ripped it out of his hands with terrifying mechanical strength. He spun the rifle around like a baseball bat and smashed the stock into the alien's faceplate. "Arthur! Beatrice! Into the vent! Now!" Thomas barked, never taking his eyes off the hallway. The terrified royal children scrambled into the maintenance shaft. Thomas picked up one of the fallen plasma repeaters, checked the charge pack, and backed into the shaft after them, slamming the heavy steel maintenance door shut behind him and throwing the deadbolt. Inside the dark, cramped service corridors, the children were hyperventilating. "Shh, shh, it's okay," Thomas said, his voice instantly dropping from a warlord's roar to a gentle, steady baritone. He knelt beside them, ignoring the smoking hole in his shoulder. "I'm Thomas. I fix the air conditioners. We're going to play a game of hide and seek, all right?" Arthur, trembling, looked at the human. They killed Genevieve. "I know, buddy, I know. But they aren't going to get you. I promise." In the nursery, Captain Gideon stepped through the shattered glass, his boots crunching over the debris. He looked down at his 3 dead commandos. He knelt, examining the crushed helmet of his lieutenant. "What happened here?" Gideon demanded over the comms. "Did the Praetorians breach the perimeter?" "Negative, Captain," the sniper on the roof replied. "Perimeter is secure. The guards are dead. But, sir, thermal imaging shows a single organic entity in the walls with the targets. It's dense. Very dense." Gideon narrowed his eyes. "Flush them out." Deep in the walls, Thomas knew he couldn't outrun them. The service corridors led to the palace's central vault, a panic room reinforced with 3 feet of titanium alloy plating. If he could get the kids inside, they would be safe until the Queen's reinforcements arrived. But the corridors were long, and the Syndicate would have motion trackers. He needed to level the playing field. Thomas ushered the kids down the shaft, stopping at a janitorial supply closet integrated into the maintenance route. He kicked the door open. Rows of industrial cleaning chemicals lined the shelves. To the advanced, delicate aliens of the Coalition, these were simple sanitation liquids. To an ex-infantryman from Earth, they were a munitions dump. He grabbed a jug of industrial ammonia and a container of high-grade bleach. "Arthur, take your sister's hand and keep running down this tunnel. You'll hit a big red door. Don't stop until you get there," Thomas instructed. "What about you?" Beatrice whimpered, tears streaking her blue-tinted face. "I've got some cleaning up to do," Thomas said, offering a strained smile. As the kids ran, Thomas went to work. He mixed the chemicals in a heavy plastic bucket, creating lethal chloramine vapor and mustard gas. He hooked the bucket up to the localized ventilation intake, bypassing the safety valves. Moments later, the heavy metal door at the end of the hall was blown off its hinges. 5 Syndicate shock troops piled into the corridor, their weapons raised. Thomas slammed the ventilation fan to maximum and ducked behind a steel conduit. The toxic gas flooded the corridor instantly. The aliens, whose respiratory systems were highly efficient and delicate, immediately began to choke. Their kinetic shields offered zero protection against ambient airborne chemicals. The shock troops collapsed, clawing at their throats as the human-made chemical weapon seared their lungs. Thomas stepped out from the cover, holding a heavy-duty, Hilti powder-actuated nail gun he had taken from his toolbox. It was designed to drive titanium spikes into concrete. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The heavy industrial spikes punched straight through the Syndicate armor. 3 more commandos dropped dead. Gideon, listening to the screams of his men over the radio, felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. "What are we fighting?" he yelled into the comms. "Is it a heavy combat droid? A rogue biological weapon?" It's the maintenance worker," a dying commando gasped over the radio. He's a human." "A human?" Gideon scoffed. "They're mechanics. Servants, push forward. Do not let them reach the vault." Thomas was bleeding heavily now. The adrenaline was masking the pain, but he knew his body was taking a toll. He retreated down the corridor, laying traps as he went. He stripped high-voltage power cables and laid them across the steel floor grates. When the next wave of assassins rounded the corner, Thomas threw a heavy breaker switch, surging 10,000 volts through the floor. The electrical discharge fried the aliens' nervous systems instantly, filling the corridor with the smell of ozone and burnt flesh. Finally, Thomas reached the red door of the vault. Arthur and Beatrice were frantically pushing the biometric panel, but it flashed red. "It won't open!" Arthur cried. "It needs a Royal Guard code!" Thomas gritted his teeth. He looked down the hallway. He could hear the heavy boots of Captain Gideon and his elite vanguard approaching. They were out of time. "Get behind me," Thomas ordered. He grabbed a heavy Stanley titanium crowbar from his belt. He jammed it into the control panel of the vault door, using sheer brute force to pry the casing off. Sparks showered over his hands, burning his skin, but his grip didn't loosen. He reached into the wiring, ripping out the primary relay and twisting the override cables together. The heavy vault door hissed and began to slowly grind open. "Go, go, go!" Thomas shoved the children inside. Before he could step in, a plasma sniper round punched through his thigh. Thomas roared, falling to one knee. The muscle was vaporized, the femur fractured. "Thomas!" Beatrice screamed, reaching out for him. "Stay inside!" Thomas yelled. He slammed his bloody hand onto the internal lockdown button. The vault door began to slide shut. At the end of the hall, Captain Gideon emerged through the smoke, flanked by 4 towering enforcers. Gideon looked at the human kneeling on the floor, bleeding from 6 wounds, unarmed except for a bloody crowbar. "You have cost me 20 of my best men, human," Gideon snarled, leveling his plasma repeater. "For what? You are just a servant." Thomas slowly dragged himself to his feet, putting all his weight on his good leg. His face was a mask of soot, blood, and primal defiance. He gripped the crowbar with both hands. "They're just kids," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling with exhausted rage. "And I'm not a servant. I'm a contractor." With a final, desperate roar, Thomas launched himself forward into the gauntlet of plasma fire. The Royal Transport ship tore through the atmosphere, ignoring all docking protocols as it slammed onto the High Palace's landing pad. The kinetic dampeners screamed in protest as the ship settled, the ramp lowering before the engines had even fully cycled down. Queen Victoria sprinted down the ramp, her regal robes trailing behind her. A ceremonial energy sword ignited in her hand. Behind her poured 50 of the Royal Guard's most elite soldiers, led by Captain Hayes. The palace was eerily silent. Plumes of black smoke billowed from the eastern wing. The beautiful, crystalline spires that had stood for a millennia were scarred by plasma burns and explosive breaches. "Secure the perimeter! Find my children!" Victoria commanded, her voice breaking with raw, unbridled panic. "If they are harmed, I will burn the Syndicate worlds to ash." Captain Hayes took point. His rifle swept forward. As they entered the grand foyer, they stopped dead in their tracks. The Queen expected to find her Praetorians dead, and she did. But scattered among them were the bodies of the Syndicate assassins. Majesty, Hayes said, kneeling next to one of the black-armored mercenaries. He scanned the body with a medical omni-tool. This doesn't make sense. The Syndicate shields are intact, but his chest cavity is entirely collapsed. Massive blunt force trauma. It looks as though he was struck by a terrestrial freight train. Victoria moved past him, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed the trail of carnage. It didn't look like a firefight. It looked like the aftermath of a natural disaster. They found the nursery. The glass was shattered. Genevieve's body lay under a blanket. Someone had taken the time to respectfully cover her amidst the chaos. The maintenance grate, Hayes pointed. The heavy steel door was ripped off its hinges, stained with alien blood. The Queen and her guard descended into the dark, claustrophobic service corridors. The deeper they went, the more horrified they became. They found the bodies of the shock troops in the ventilation shaft, their lungs burned by a crude, terrifyingly effective chemical mixture. They found the electrocuted vanguard, their armor fused to the floor grates. Whoever did this, Hayes whispered, genuine fear in his voice, is not fighting by the Geneva Station conventions. This is barbaric. It's primitive warfare. I don't care, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face as she saw a discarded, bloody wrench. If they saved my children, I will give them half my kingdom. They reached the final hallway leading to the royal vault. The corridor was practically a slaughterhouse, and there, pinned to the wall, was Captain Gideon. The Syndicate leader was dead, his eyes wide open in absolute terror. Embedded deep into his chest plate, pinning him securely to the reinforced titanium bulkhead, was a heavy steel Stanley crowbar. Victoria rushed to the vault door. It was covered in scorch marks, dented and battered, but it was sealed shut. "Arthur! Beatrice!" she screamed, pounding her fists against the cold metal. "It is your mother! Open the door!" For a terrifying, agonizing minute, there was only silence. Then, a heavy mechanical clank echoed from within. The manual override was being slowly, painfully turned. The heavy blast doors hissed and parted, smoke pouring out from the interior. Victoria dropped to her knees as Prince Arthur and Princess Beatrice ran out, throwing their arms around her neck. They were covered in soot and crying, but unharmed. Not a single scratch marred their delicate skin. "Mother! Mother, you came back!" Arthur sobbed, burying his face in her robes. "I am here, my darlings. I am here," Victoria wept, holding them so tight she feared she might break them herself. She looked up, over their heads, into the dim light of the vault. Sitting against the back wall, sitting in a pool of his own blood, was Thomas Fletcher. His Carhartt uniform was shredded. He had taken at least 4 plasma burns to the torso and legs. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, cauterized cleanly off. He looked pale, trembling violently as the massive overdose of adrenaline finally began to leave his system, leaving behind only the agonizing shock of his injuries. Yet, in his lap, he was holding the broken barrel of a plasma rifle, his right hand still gripping it like a club, ready to swing at whoever came through the door. When he saw the Queen, the tension slowly left his shoulders. The rifle clattered to the floor. Captain Hayes and the medics rushed into the room. Hayes stared at the human, completely, utterly bewildered. "By the stars. You? A single maintenance contractor? You killed 20 elite Syndicate commandos?" Thomas coughed, spitting a glob of blood onto the floor. He looked up at the towering alien captain, then over to the Queen. "Ma'am," Thomas wheezed, forcing a weak, delirious smile. "The HVAC in the nursery is fixed, but I think I'm going to need to clock out early today." His eyes rolled back, and he slumped sideways against the cold metal wall. "Medics!" Victoria screamed, her regal composure completely shattering. She carefully disentangled herself from her children and crawled over to the dying human, taking his heavy, blood-soaked hand in her delicate ones. "Keep him alive! Do you hear me? If he dies, I will execute every physician in this palace. Keep him alive!" The medics swarmed him, injecting him with synthetic coagulants and biofoam. "His biology is insane, Majesty," the lead medic said, frantically working over Thomas's chest. "His heart is beating at nearly 200 beats per minute. A coalition citizen's heart would have exploded an hour ago." The sheer density of his bones stopped the plasma from penetrating his vital organs. He is built like a dreadnought. Victoria looked back at the hallway, at the trail of slaughtered elite assassins, and then down at the quiet, unassuming man who pruned her gardens and fixed her air conditioning. The galaxy had always looked down on humans. They thought them primitive, lacking the elegant finesse of advanced species. They mocked their lack of biotics, their reliance on heavy, clunky machinery like caterpillar tractors and physical tools. But looking at the carnage, Queen Victoria realized the terrifying truth. Humans didn't need energy shields or biotic grace. They were born on a world that constantly tried to kill them, and they had evolved to fight back with an unyielding, savage refusal to die. They weren't just mechanics, they were the universe's ultimate apex protectors. "Hold on, Thomas," Victoria whispered softly, pressing her forehead against his grimy, calloused hand. "You are going home, I promise you." The Royal Medical Pavilion of Prime Meridian was a marvel of coalition engineering. It was a serene, sterile environment bathed in soft, ultraviolet light, where healing was achieved through harmonic frequency emitters and delicate cellular reweaving. The coalition species were fragile. Their medical science was designed to treat microfractures, energy burns, and radiation sickness with surgical, painless precision. They were utterly unprepared for the biological catastrophe that was Thomas Fletcher. Dr. Aris, the chief medical officer, hovered over the biobed, his 6 elongated digits dancing across a holographic diagnostic scanner. He looked like he was witnessing a horror, his large, pupilless eyes wide with a mixture of revulsion and awe. Queen Victoria stood on the other side of the glass partition, her hands clasped tightly together. She had refused to change out of her blood-stained royal robes. Prince Arthur and Princess Beatrice sat quietly on a crystalline bench beside her, their eyes fixed on the man who had saved them. "Report, Doctor," Victoria commanded through the intercom, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. Dr. Aris swallowed hard, stepping out of the quarantine zone. "Majesty, I lack the vocabulary to adequately describe his physiology. His body is a war zone, yet it is repairing itself with an aggression I have never documented in any known species." "Explain," the Queen demanded. "When we brought him in, he had lost nearly 40% of his blood volume," Aris said, pulling up a rotating 3D model of Thomas's dense skeletal structure. "For a coalition citizen, a 10% drop induces fatal cardiac failure. His heart simply beat harder. Furthermore, his blood does not flow like ours. It is thick with heavily nucleated cells that instantly began creating a crude physical barrier over his wounds. A biological concrete, if you will. The humans call them platelets. He is literally cementing himself back together." Victoria looked through the glass. Thomas lay unconscious, heavy bandages wrapped around his chest and thigh. His skin was pale, but his chest rose and fell with a steady, rhythmic, mechanical certainty. "And his bones?" she asked softly. "They are made of calcium phosphate, woven in a matrix so dense it is comparable to industrial starship plating," Aris whispered, shaking his head. "The Syndicate plasma sniper round vaporized his muscle tissue, but when it struck his femur, it deflected. It shattered the bone, yes, but it did not penetrate the marrow. Majesty, a direct hit from a plasma rifle should have severed his leg entirely. Instead, his body absorbed the kinetic shock. And the most terrifying part? The bone is already beginning to fuse back together. He doesn't just heal, he calcifies. He builds internal armor over his previous injuries." Victoria placed a hand on the glass. "He is a father, Dr. Aris. He works for Caterpillar Interstellar to send credits back to a high-gravity death world so his daughter can attend a university. He is not a soldier, he is a mechanic. If this is what their mechanics are capable of," Aris muttered, "I pray we never meet their armies." 3 days later, Thomas opened his eyes. The harsh, ultraviolet light had been dimmed to a warm, incandescent glow. His entire body felt as though it had been dragged behind a speeding truck on a gravel road, a sensation he vaguely remembered from a deployment in Kabul decades ago. He groaned, instinctively trying to reach for his shoulder, only to find his arm restrained by a soft, magnetic field. "Please do not strain yourself, Mr. Fletcher." Thomas turned his head. Queen Victoria was sitting in a modest chair beside his bed. She wore a simple, unadorned silver gown, completely devoid of her usual regal crowns and sashes. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were incredibly warm. "Your Majesty," Thomas rasped, his throat dry. He tried to sit up, his blue-collar deference kicking in. I need to get back to the Eastern Wing." The thermal exchange unit was left open. "Thomas," Victoria interrupted, placing a gentle hand on his chest to keep him down. "The Eastern Wing is a crater. The thermal exchange unit is the least of our concerns." The memories came crashing back in a violent wave of adrenaline and smoke. The shattered glass, the dead nursemaid, the syndicate assassins, the heavy metallic thud of his wrench crushing alien armor. "The kids," Thomas gasped, his heart monitor spiking. "Arthur? Beatrice?" "They are safe," Victoria said, her voice catching. "Because of you. They haven't left the pavilion since you were brought in. They are currently asleep in the adjoining room." Thomas let out a long, shaky breath, sinking back into the bio bed. "Good. That's good." "You lost 2 fingers on your left hand," Victoria noted quietly, her eyes tracing the heavy bandages. "And you suffered 3rd-degree plasma burns across your torso. Our doctors have done their best, but human biology is resilient to our delicate methods. You will carry heavy scars." "Scars are fine," Thomas chuckled weakly. "Back at the Mayo Clinic on Earth, they'd have charged me $1 million just for the bandages. I'm just glad the little ones are all right." Victoria leaned forward, her expression shifting from a relieved mother to a stern monarch. "Thomas, what you did was extraordinary, but it has created a massive political shockwave. The syndicate is furious." Thomas frowned. "Furious? They tried to murder your kids." "They are denying it," she said bitterly. "They claim the commandos were rogue elements. But worse, the syndicate ambassador, Lord Malachor, has arrived on Prime Meridian. He is demanding a galactic tribunal. He is accusing me of harboring an unregistered Class 9 biological weapon of mass destruction." Thomas blinked. "A bioweapon? Me?" "They recovered the security footage from the maintenance corridors," Victoria explained. "They saw how you killed them. They saw the chloramine gas, the electrocution, the sheer physical brutality. In the eyes of the Coalition, kinetic violence is considered archaic and barbaric. Malachor is twisting the narrative. He claims no mere mechanic could dismantle an elite vanguard single-handedly. He is demanding you be handed over to the Syndicate for scientific evaluation and trial." Thomas stared at the ceiling for a long moment. He felt the phantom pain in his missing fingers. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, studying engineering back in Boston. He had spent his whole life trying to escape wars, only to find himself at the center of a galactic one. "All right," Thomas said, his voice hardening into a low, gravelly timbre that sent a shiver down the Queen's spine. "When is the hearing?" "Tomorrow," Victoria said. "But you will not attend. I will not allow it. You are under my royal protection." "With respect, Your Majesty," Thomas said, hitting the release button on his magnetic restraints with his good hand. He slowly swung his legs over the edge of the bed. His muscles screamed in agony, but he forced himself to stand, gripping the rail of the bed with white knuckles. "If you hide me, it proves them right. It makes me look like a monster, kept in a cage." He looked at the Queen, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrestrial fire. "I'm a human, and it's about time the galaxy finds out what that actually means." The Grand Assembly of Prime Meridian was an architectural masterpiece, a sprawling amphitheater carved from a single geode of luminescent quartz. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species murmured in the tiered seating. In the center of the room stood the podium, a raised platform where the fate of worlds was debated. Lord Malachor, the Syndicate ambassador, stood in the center, his scaled skin shimmering under the lights. He was a tall, imposing reptilian, dripping with arrogant confidence. Above him, massive holographic screens played the security footage from the High Palace. The entire assembly watched in horrified silence. They saw the human, covered in grease and blood, rip a heavy steel grating off the wall and hurl it with enough force to shatter a commando's ribs. They watched him weaponize sanitation fluids, common bleach, and ammonia into a lethal trench warfare gas. They gasped as the heavy, hilty nail gun punched through advanced kinetic armor, as if it were paper. And finally, they saw the end. The human, crippled and bleeding, pinning Captain Gideon to a titanium bulkhead with a Stanley crowbar. "Behold!" Malachor's voice boomed across the amphitheater. This is not a sentient being. This is a feral beast, a death world predator masquerading as a laborer. Malachor pointed an accusing finger at Queen Victoria, who sat in the high monarch's seat, her face an unreadable mask. Queen Victoria employed this thing in the same halls as her children. We demand reparations for the slaughter of our citizens. We demand that humanity be restricted to their home system. And we demand this creature, this Thomas Fletcher, be executed for war crimes. The assembly erupted into chaotic murmurs. Many of the pacifist coalition species looked physically ill from the footage. Malachor was winning. He was successfully painting the syndicate assassins as victims of human barbarism. Ambassador Malachor, Queen Victoria's voice cut through the noise, amplified by the acoustics of the crystal chamber. You speak of war crimes. Yet your citizens infiltrated my palace with plasma repeaters, aiming them at a 7-year-old boy. Rogue mercenaries, Malachor spat back. A tragedy, yes, but handled by the authorities. Not by a biological weapon. He is not a weapon. A new voice echoed from the heavy mahogany doors at the rear of the chamber. The assembly fell dead silent as the doors opened. Thomas Fletcher walked in. He was not wearing a prison uniform, nor was he wearing his greasy Carhartt overalls. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, standard formal wear for Earth diplomats. He walked with a heavy limp, leaning on a polished titanium cane. His left arm was in a sling, his missing fingers clearly visible. The scars on his neck from the plasma burns were a stark, brutal contrast to his sharp suit. He looked exactly like what he was, a scarred survivor of a harsh world, possessing a quiet, terrifying dignity. Flanking him were not royal praetorians, but two towering humans in heavy tactical gear. They wore matte olive kinetic plating, bearing the insignia of Constellus Interstellar Security, a private Earth military firm. They carried heavy, ballistic assault rifles, primitive weapons by galactic standards, but utterly devastating in enclosed spaces. Malachor stepped back, his scales paling. What is the meaning of this? Armed humans in the assembly? Thomas ignored him. He limped slowly down the central aisle, the eyes of 1,000 alien species fixed upon him. He reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked up at the massive screen, playing his violent stand in the palace. My name is Thomas Fletcher, he began, his voice calm, steady, and utterly devoid of fear. I was born in Detroit, Michigan, on the planet Earth. I fix air conditioners. He looked directly at Lord Malachor. You call me a beast. You call my actions barbaric. Thomas pointed his cane at the screen. You see a monster. But back on my world, we have a saying. There is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a parent protecting its young. I didn't care about galactic politics. I didn't care about your kinetic shields. I saw 4 armed men pointing guns at children who trusted me. So, I stopped them. Malachor sneered. With chemical weapons and crude blunt instruments. You are a savage. Thomas leaned into the microphone. On Earth, we don't fight to look elegant, Ambassador. We fight to survive. You sent assassins who relied on technology that bends light and dissipates energy. You forgot what it's like to be hit with a heavy piece of steel moving very fast. That's not savagery, that's physics. A low murmur rippled through the coalition delegates. The logic was blunt, unrefined, but undeniably true. You want to restrict humanity to our system? Thomas continued, his voice rising, filling the chamber with the undeniable presence of an apex predator. You want to execute me? Go ahead and try. But know this. I am just a mechanic. I am an old, tired man who fixes pipes for a living. If you declare war on Earth over this, you won't be fighting the mechanics. You'll be fighting the people who trained me. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. And I promise you, Thomas whispered, a terrifyingly cold edge to his voice, you don't want to meet them. Queen Victoria stood up. Her presence commanded the immediate attention of the room. The tribunal has heard the evidence, Victoria declared. The syndicate sent murderers to my home. A human stopped them. Therefore, I reject the ambassador's demands in their entirety. Malachor hissed, his frills flaring. This is an outrage! You risk fracturing the coalition. Your Praetorian Guard is weak, Victoria. Who will protect your borders when the syndicate retaliates? Victoria smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile. You assume I am relying on the Praetorians, Ambassador, she said smoothly. She pressed a button on her console. The massive holographic screens shifted from the security footage to a live feed of Prime Meridian's orbital space. Emerging from hyperspace jumps were massive, blocky, unelegant ships. They were built from dark gray titanium, bristling with heavy railguns, missile pods, and thick ablative armor. They were purely functional, incredibly heavily armed, and distinctly human. Emblazoned on their hulls were the logos of Earth's most formidable defense contractors: Lockheed Martin Stellar, General Dynamics, and Academy. During Mr. Fletcher's recovery, Queen Victoria announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority, "I opened diplomatic channels with the United Nations of Earth. I have signed a new, exclusive defense contract. The High Palace will no longer be guarded by energy shields alone." She looked down at Thomas with profound respect. Humanity is no longer classified as mere laborers within the coalition. Effective immediately, they are the vanguard of the royal fleet. They are our shield, and if the Syndicate takes one step across our borders, they will be our sword. Malachor stared at the orbital feed, watching the massive human dreadnoughts lock into defensive formation around the planet. The sheer kinetic firepower in orbit was enough to crack the planet's crust. He swallowed hard, realizing he had not only failed to assassinate the royal bloodline, but he had just inadvertently unleashed the most dangerous species in the galaxy upon his own people. Without another word, the Syndicate ambassador turned and fled the assembly chamber. The hall erupted into cheers. The coalition species, long terrified of the Syndicate's shadow, finally saw a protector they could rally behind. Thomas stepped down from the podium. As he walked back up the aisle, the alien delegates, beings of light, crystal, and elegance, parted for him, bowing their heads in profound reverence. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was the man who had drawn a line in the sand with a wrench and a crowbar. At the top of the stairs, Queen Victoria stood, waiting, holding the hands of Prince Arthur and Princess Beatrice. The children broke away from their mother and ran to Thomas, hugging his good arm. Thomas smiled, dropping his cane to run his hand through Arthur's hair. "You did it, Thomas," Arthur beamed. "We did it, buddy," Thomas replied softly. Victoria approached him, pulling a small, heavy silver medal from her robes. It bore the crest of the High Palace. She pinned it to the lapel of his suit. "I cannot give you half my kingdom, Sir Thomas," Victoria said softly, a tear glistening in her eye. "But you have my eternal gratitude. And your daughter's university tuition at MIT has been paid in full, courtesy of the Royal Treasury." Thomas paused, his stoic demeanor finally cracking just a little. A genuine, relieved smile spread across his scarred face. "Thank you, Your Majesty," he said. He looked over his shoulder at the massive human warships lingering in the sky above the Crystal City. "I guess I won't be fixing the air conditioning anymore." "No," Victoria smiled. "But I have a feeling there are a few Syndicate worlds that are about to need some very heavy maintenance." If you love this story of human resilience, survival, and the terrifying power of the human protective instinct, make sure to hit that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY stories where humanity proves exactly why the galaxy should never, ever mess with our kind. Drop a comment below on what you want to see the human mechanics conquer next.
Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, the Queen came home to an attack and found a human servant saving her children. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the courage and selflessness at the heart of the story. In a moment of danger, someone who might have been overlooked chose to step forward and protect others without hesitation. That combination of bravery, loyalty, and sacrifice is what gave the story its emotional weight for me. I think one of the gentle lessons here is that true character often shows itself when things are at their hardest. Titles, status, and recognition matter far less than the choices we make when others need us. In everyday life, even small acts of responsibility and kindness can have a bigger impact than we realise. Do you think the servant understood how important that decision would become? And what moment in the story stayed with you the longest? Thanks for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe like or subscribe for more stories like this.